best gift you give yourself, your family, your team, your church, your organization, your business is a healthy you. I do think as a leader, you better be secure in yourself. You better have a backbone and you better have thick skin. Am I living well the one and only life I'm ever gonna have?
This is the Live, Lead, Last podcast.
Hey friends, and welcome back to the Live, Lead, Last podcast. I'm your host, James Duvall, and I'm so glad you're here. Before we jump into today's episode, I want to invite you to join the Live, Lead, Last 5-day leadership reset. It's a free practical tool designed to help you realign your priorities, reclaim your focus, and lead with more purpose and clarity. You can start today at liveleadlast.com/reset. In today's episode, we're talking about something every leader wrestles with: how to lead from a place of health, not hustle. Recent studies show that 60% of leaders report feeling isolated and emotionally depleted. Whether you're in a church, a nonprofit, or the marketplace, the pace and pressure of leadership today can quietly erode the very foundation you lead from, your soul. So to help us navigate that, I'm joined by Lance Witt. Lance has been leading churches and organizations for over 40 years. He's pastored 3 churches and served as an executive teaching pastor at Saddleback Church during the years of Purpose-Driven Life, where he helped lead the global 40 Days of Purpose campaign, impacting over 25,000 churches worldwide. In 2007, Lance launched Replenish, an organization dedicated to helping leaders live and lead from a healthy soul. Since then, he's coached and equipped thousands of leaders through speaking, writing, and personal coaching, and a tool he calls Your One Life Process. Lance is the author of several books, including Replenish, High Impact Teams, and Your One Life. He's also a husband, dad, granddad, and the man who practices what he preaches, living with intention, margin, and deeply rooted purpose. I always walk away challenged and inspired when I talk with Lance, and I think you will too. So let's jump into this conversation with Lance Witt. Lance, man, it's so great to have you on the podcast. Thanks for spending some time with us today.
Thank you, James. I always love getting the chance to be with you. I really appreciate our friendship, and anytime I can hang out with you, that's a win for my life. So I'm honored to be on the podcast.
Awesome, man. Well, you've been on the Live, Lead, Last podcast before, and also on the Art of Espousing with my wife, Lisa, and I. And so many of our listeners may know a little bit about you already, but I love just for you to give us like a life update. What's going on in your life right now?
Wow. Well, gosh, it's hard to believe that I've been doing Replenish going on 20 years. So a lot of my life is focused around speaking on kind of the health of leaders. You know, that's become a lot more popular since COVID. It wasn't all that sexy before COVID, but since then, everybody's doing it. I'm also doing the One Life process that I've created. I'm doing that for individuals as well as training other facilitators. I still work with a few churches around the country. I do coaching with several, really trying to focus more on younger kind of pastor leaders, a few business people. But I'm also in a season of life, James, at age 66, that I'm trying to slow it down. So I am on what I call my glide path to the finish line. And so I'm just each year dialing back a little bit, creating a little more margin and space, and just time for family and the things that are most important to me. So I'm loving that. And probably the other update is we just did our annual cousin camp with my 4 granddaughters, took them for a week to Phoenix, and just had an amazing time there. It's such a fun age. And that is just such a life-giving part of my life. So anyway, a lot more going on in our world, but those are a few things that give you kind of an update.
You know, Lance, one of the things I love about you is that you are constantly growing yourself and continue to develop. You're not sitting on the sidelines. You say you're 66, but I think the years I've known you, you're probably the healthiest you've been physically and working on your health and still growing business and investing in people. And I think it's really awesome. I love, you said 20 years now with Replenish, which is hard to believe. I mean, 20 years goes by fast. Take us back a little bit and talk to us about like, what was the thing that actually drew you initially to start Replenish?
Well, that's a pretty easy answer. It would be my own brokenness and my life being a little bit in a mess. Yeah, I mean, I think I was like a lot of pastors who had a lot of ambition, who want the Lord to use my life. And I was, love being a leader in ministry, but I've always struggled with workaholism, being compulsively busy, just working all the time, going fast. And then, I spent 7 years at Saddleback Church during the years that Rick wrote Purpose Driven Life. And that was an amazing rocket ride of ministry influence, but it also came with a lot of pressure and chaos. And the truth is, I wasn't leading myself well. And so after 7 years, I stepped away. Really hard decision. But I now can look back and tell you, I wasn't longing for a different way to do ministry. I was longing for a different way to do life. And so my stepping out of that role and being in that bit of a, dark season was what led me to start paying attention to my own soul, paying attention to my health, my rhythms, understanding like my genogram. And I just began to explore all of that kind of stuff. And so out of that then was birthed this idea of, could I come alongside other leaders and help them live and lead from a healthy soul too?
That's amazing. I've heard your story many times. And as you were just sharing it, it made me think a lot of times as leaders or learners specifically, we grow out of what we teach. And so when you launched into Replenish, how much of like where you're at now did you have like kind of formalized? Like you had this idea, this ministry, this business, but how much of it was kind of working it out in yourself as you were?
In many, many ways, James, I still feel like it is still that, but I'm a lot more clear today around some best practices and things that actually help me stay in a healthy place. Back then, in fact, it's interesting when I think about writing the book Replenish that's now been out, a little more than 15 years. Back then, I had a lot more questions than answers. But I think one reason the book has connected well with people is the questions I had resonated with them too. And even though I didn't have a lot on the solution side, I knew I was asking the right questions and working through the right kinds of things. And just as the years have gone on, I feel like I've just developed this in a much more robust way with some practices. And I think early on, here's how I would describe it. Early on, it was an app that I added to the software of my life. But now I feel like this has really become an operating system for me. But it's been 20 years in the making of it becoming an operating system. So, but in those early days, even as I went, and again, very little of my work would have been Replenish oriented in those days. A lot of it was just consulting, speaking, helping people with small groups, curriculum, whatever, right? I was kind of just hustling because I didn't have a job and was trying to figure out what I was going to do. But over time now, pretty much everything I do is focused on the health of leaders. But it's been a slow turn toward that direction.
Yeah. I feel like, when you started Replenish, at least in the circles that I ran in the church space, it was really countercultural to church, right? This whole idea of actually caring for yourself. And I think even today, as you think about like the landscape of leadership, there's so much more content on like self-care and like people are biohacking and cold plunging and taking supplements and eating healthy and so forth. But 20 years ago, that wasn't really the case, right? And so there was really, I would assume there was kind of a push against kind of the norms. And you were pre some of the stuff on like Sabbath and some of the books that came out with Replenish. So one of the things that I've always heard you say is that self-care is not selfish, it's good stewardship. And probably 20 years ago, that was really a push against it. But how have you talk a little bit about that statement, but also how have you seen the progression, or have you seen progression in leadership, especially maybe in the faith space, nonprofit space, leadership space of self-care?
Yeah. I think if you rewind the clock to when I started in ministry, kind of the unspoken kind of way to live in ministry was that you sacrificed everything, right? You put your own self and your family, and you almost wore, sacrificing your family as a bit of a badge of honor, and being compulsively busy and always available. Like you would hear things in church growth conferences like, you can rest when you get to heaven. And, that's good seminar content. It's just lousy theology. And that's the way I lived. I bought into that hook, line, and sinker. but I began to really see the toll it was taking on my own life and soul and marriage and parenting and everything. And so, in the last 20 years have sort of reshaped some of my theology around that. And I really do believe that self-care is not selfish. Now, you can be self-indulgent, self-gratifying, self-absorbed. All of those are unhealthy. But when you are sharpening your axe and you are filling your bucket so that you are the best version of yourself, that's good stewardship. And because you've got your one and only life. And I think everybody who is in ministry gets this intuitively. Leading on empty is really hard because ministry is complicated. And then when you add to it an empty soul and you're drained and you don't have anything in, kind of anything left in your tank, that just becomes really challenging. And so I feel like for me, part of this journey has been to begin with just recognizing my own humanity and my own limits, and that I was a person before I was ever called to be a pastor. And I think sometimes in ministry, we pretend that we don't have the same needs as everybody else. And the truth is, I do. And I have to be as conscientious and be as intentional as I would want people in my church or my ministry to be in what they do. So, and I do think things are getting better. The conversation is there, and there's a lot more talk about healthy rhythms and Sabbath, the practice of Sabbath, and actually things like sabbaticals. And I see pastors have more life-giving hobbies. When, you rewind the clock 30 years ago, I feel like that was really almost non-existent. And that principle is kind of, for me, James, built on this assumption or belief that the best gift you give yourself, your family, your team, your church, your organization, your business is a healthy you. And so you being the best version of yourself really matters. And I always say that when I work with leaders, most Christians I know are delight deficient. Like they don't have enough life-giving things in their day-to-day world that put life back in them. And so I think a good question to ask if you're listening is just like, what is life-giving to me? And pay attention to your answers to that and give it some serious thought.
Yeah, I was just having this conversation with a core group of guys I meet with, and we're talking about this idea of your circles of influence, and it all starts with self, and you can only give out of what you possess. And that fact that if you're constantly trying to give out of an empty well or just out of, nothing's there, you're actually not feeding life into anybody. Right.
No.
You're actually not accomplishing anything. And I think that's where a lot of leaders struggle, is because it is leadership, and everything in life has its challenges, but you're giving out emotionally, you're giving out mentally, there's a physical piece to it and so forth. And so that one whole life, you actually need to have some self-care there. And so that you can actually have something to actually give to your family, to your team, to your organization, community. I'm interested to know, what are some warning signs that a leader needs to be aware of that maybe, we talked about the root system of our life, the things that are below the surface that actually feed into, our reality of how we experience life. What are some things that you would warn a leader to be looking for, some red lights, some caution flags that hey, you're becoming unrooted or unhealthy in your leadership?
Yeah, I think you actually alluded to the first thing I would mention, which is to realize that the struggle with health is first internal. It always leaks out externally, but it is beneath the surface, down in the root system. And again, I think this is very consistent with Scripture that life flows from the inside to the outside. It always goes from root to fruit. But we tend to want to focus on all the external stuff. And so again, I've shared I was a workaholic and compulsively busy. And so when you're that way, you're always managing your overcommitments, right? And you're overscheduling your calendar. So one day I was sitting with my calendar again, trying to figure out how to work smarter and how could I cram more in and do more, just because I wanted to get after it, right? It was one of those days, the only way I know to describe it is like the Holy Spirit ambushed me. And he just turned the spotlight off of my calendar and put it on my soul. And I began to hear questions like, Lance, why are you so compulsively busy? Why do you always overschedule your calendar? Why do you say yes to everything? And why do you care so much what everybody thinks? What is all that about? And it just helped me realize, this was not a calendar issue. It was a soul issue. It was something going on inside of me that was broken. And so I would say to a leader, if you want to get serious about this, you've got to learn to pay attention to your own self and where are some of those broken places that often are connected back to our family of origin, to your genogram.
Yeah.
And that you may not be self-aware about, but I promise you other people see it. But then it always leaks out externally, right? So I just think about things like you're more irritable, you are impatient. There's just not much joy or contentment. You can't seem to really celebrate anything anymore. Or maybe the most obvious sign is you are just always exhausted. And I think there's a difference between being good tired, which I can recover from a good Sabbath or maybe a week's vacation. I've had a busy push in ministry and that time off recover. That's different than being depleted, which I think unhealthy is you end up being depleted, and that's a long recovery. I think another sign, James, is you can't receive feedback in a healthy way. You get defensive, you live isolated. Maybe you're engaging in escapist kinds of activities, binge watching television, porn, could be a variety of things. But all of those things to me would be a warning light on the dashboard of my life that there's something going on I need to pay attention to.
Yeah, I just recently had a guy named Chandler Rogers on the podcast, and is the founder of an app called Join Relay for people who are struggling with addiction, pornography. And one of the things he said that stuck with me is he said most people don't have a porn problem, they have a pain problem. And so when you begin to understand that there's what the pain is below, and those broken places and so forth that we tend to try to feed with things are unhealthy, it makes a lot of sense. I also think when you're talking about that, just the places of our family origin and those things that are put on us, belief systems. Lisa and I were just talking yesterday about this idea of when we say I should or I ought to, who told you should or who said you ought to? And a lot of that comes from, our family origin, tendencies from our, things that have been nurtured into us and so forth. And so I think this is probably, I think you would agree where self-awareness is so important, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I use a statement a lot in my ministry that self-awareness is your best defense against self-deceit. And so I think every leader, the higher you go up in leadership, the more critical it is for you to lean into self-awareness and to lean into things like genogram and family of origin and really honest feedback, and that you're actually seeking that out. And you get to work with a lot of leaders just like I do. And I believe that for a lot of leaders, their leadership lid is their lack of self-awareness.
Yeah.
It's not their communication or persuasive abilities or strategic thinking. It is their lack of self-awareness. And it's creating toxicity in their family and their team. And so I couldn't agree with you more that self-awareness is critical.
Yeah. And I think probably, I've heard you talk about that a lot of leaders deal with terminal niceness, right? Always having to, be something for people and so forth. Talk to us a little bit about that idea of terminal niceness and how it undermines rootedness in leadership.
Yeah, I think this is something that's common in church culture. We're kind, we're gracious people, we're diplomatic. The shadow side of that means often we don't really deal with hard stuff, and we don't have honest, mature, adult conversations about difficult things. And so I would put that label on it that we suffer from terminal niceness. And so I really feel like this is a skill that we just have to develop and get better at. And so I think about even my family growing up, we didn't deal with hard stuff. We just shoved it under the rug and assumed that if you just gave it enough time, it would go away. So I didn't come into ministry or leadership having good skills. And so I think we got to get much better about giving people skills. And I think we got to get really granular on techniques about how do you do this? How do you start a conversation? How do you come out of the conversation? What are some of the landmines you want to stay away from when you're in those conversations? And the good news is there's a lot more out there. I've written some on this, but I think two good resources I would recommend are Susan Scott's book, Fierce Conversations, really helpful in my journey with this, and then the book, Crucial Conversations, which is, again, very practical. And so I think, again, if we don't do this, if we don't lean into this, we create an unintentional, unhealthy culture. And that's not true unity. You know, just because we're all nice and diplomatic doesn't mean we have true unity. I mean, you could test that against the hallway conversations that often happen in local churches or ministries or businesses, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I just think this is one of those, like, if you're going to have a healthy leadership culture and be healthy and rooted in the right way, you've got to get some training around this and start modeling it, right?
Right.
Like, hey, we keep short accounts and we get in the room and we are committed to loving each other, but walking into the deep waters of conflict and coming out on the other side, unified and resolved and, you know, humble, that we all got to learn how to do this better.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that's probably important in leadership training and development and leadership culture in organizations is sometimes we talk about big ideas. Well, we have to have better communication or better conversations, but the actual real granular, how do you actually do it? And, you know, was it See John Run or whatever the old book was, like, here's how you do it. And I think so many organizations, we have values or we have ideas, we have these guiding principles, but a lot of them are theoretical or philosophical. And when you get down in the organization, depending on how large the organization is, it's translated so differently or heard so differently. And so as leaders, I think it's to kind of go, how do we build structure that actually helps all the way down to the lowest levels of organization know how to be healthy in their conversations, healthy in their leadership, and lead up in those areas. And I'm interested in this area of terminal lightness. How could that be ultimately destructive to an organization, whether that's a church, or how does that play out, do you think, long term?
If you're in a culture of terminal niceness? Yeah, I think first off, it creates a false sense of unity. Like we all get along in the meeting or publicly, but behind closed doors and private conversations, there's gossip, there's criticism, there's judgmentalism. We end up talking about people rather than talking to people. And then I think it creates like this duplicitous sort of like, oh, you got to act this way to kind of create this outward image or posture. But behind the scenes, the culture is that's where the real conversations happen. And so I think over time, what that creates is toxicity.
Yeah.
And people kind of know like, oh yeah, you can't really have honest conversations here. We just pretend and we get along publicly, but beneath the surface, it's pretty unhealthy. And you know, it's like we wash the outside of the wound, but there's an infection underneath the surface that everybody's just kind of ignoring. And I always say to senior leaders, like, if you let this stuff go on and you know it's there, but you're ignoring it or neglecting it, ultimately you will undermine your own leadership with the rest of the team because they see it and they wonder why you're not doing anything about it. Why are you letting unhealthy stuff continue to go on inside the culture? And so ultimately you erode your own leadership if you don't, you know, course correct this stuff.
Yeah, so good. You know, as we mentioned earlier, there's, you know, so many advances and things have come so far from 20 years ago of self-care not feeling as selfish as it did before. But
yeah,
I'm interested from your perspective as you work with organizations, work with church and so forth, the complexity of leadership today, what the new challenges that have come because of just where society is today, the challenges specifically to spiritual and emotional health. Like where are you seeing that today we are in those areas?
Yeah, I just think, you know, as an old guy now in most of the rooms I sit in working with teams, like I look people and go, hey, the generation in which you're doing ministry is more complex than any in my lifetime. And I really think it is true. Like it is more challenging to serve in ministry and nonprofits and, you know, Christian businesses than it ever was in the last 50 years. So the culture overall has just become more hostile, right? And then the cultural issues that are now forcing the church to respond are more complicated, right? We didn't have gender identity issues 25 years ago. So we didn't have cancel culture in the way that it expresses itself now, right? Social media was not a phenomenon 30 years ago. Yeah. So I think all of those things have added to the complexity. And then we're just in a politically volatile culture now. And it just shows up in so many different ways. So I do think as a leader, you better be secure in yourself. You better have a backbone and you better have thick skin.
Right.
And know that your identity is in Jesus and not in what other people think about you. And so one of the key concepts I really have resonated with in my life the last 15 years is this idea of differentiation. And differentiation simply means I am able to live in a way that I can be connected to you. I can be present when we're together. I can love you well, but I don't need anything from you. I don't need your affirmation or validation. I don't need your approval. Like I am differentiated. And so again, I'm not disconnected. I am engaged in loving people well and up close and personal ways. But I also now am so clear about my identity and who I am in Christ and what I'm called to that I don't need something unhealthy from you to make me feel better about myself. And I think when you are differentiated, it's really the first time that you can love people well because you don't need anything from them. Yeah. So you can really give yourself to them in a very complete way. And so I think we've got to learn those more soft skills if we're going to be healthy in this complex culture we're living in.
What if the key to unlocking your team's full potential is already inside of them and you? The free 5 Voices assessment helps business leaders, entrepreneurs, and creatives discover their natural leadership voice. It's not just a personality test. It's a game changer for communication, collaboration, and culture. You'll gain insight into how you lead, how others receive you, and how to build trust faster. So take the free assessment today at liveleadlast.com/voice and start leading with greater clarity, alignment, and impact. Your voice matters. Learn how to use it today. So I would say that probably one of the key things that I've learned from you, and maybe one of your key messages, is the whole idea of Sabbath and around Sabbath. So you would say that's accurate, that because I think you've taught me so much about that. But can you talk a little bit about, help us understand what Sabbath is? And also, I know that you have a framework that you use for Sabbath. And so, Sabbath is kind of a spiritual word, but we all need Sabbath, right? And so talk to us a little bit about that, your understanding, and then share just a little bit about your framework for Sabbath.
Yeah. Well, the word is not particularly a spiritual word in Hebrew. It just means to stop or to quit. And basically the command of God going all the way back to creation, and God roots it into creation. And he says, when I created the world, on the 7th day I rested, not because I needed a break or I was exhausted. God says, but because I was wanting to model something for you, because being created in my image, I wanted you to know that you have built into your DNA this need to have a rhythm of work hard and then rest, produce and then create space to restore. And so God established this rhythm of 1 day in 7 being a day that is not about work, not about being productive, but a day to stop and to not let it be about doing, but rather about being. And so like you mentioned, I use kind of a 5-part template because I think Sabbath looks different depending on the season that you're in. So, I start with prepare, that there's some work ahead of getting ready to not work, some things that might need to be organized and arranged so you can stop. And then to actually stop from all the stuff that is your vocation and obligation and work, and put that on the shelf for 24 hours. And guess what? The world can get by without you for 24 hours. And then there's rest that's built into what God said it is to be a day of rest, that it is the word which means to be at peace, to be not only to physically sleep, but to have emotional rest as I stop from all the stuff of the demands of my life. And then delight. Like we ought to do some things on Sabbath that put life in us. Like, what do you do that brings you delight and joy? And then I think it's also a day of worship. It is called a Sabbath unto the Lord. And so it is also for extended times of music and spiritual praise, of times in prayer, lingering over scripture. And so I think to take those 5 words and go, yeah, what would it look like for you to prayer, stop, rest, delight, and worship on a Sabbath? And a couple of practical things I would just give coaching on this, James, would be like, first off, get it on your schedule and get ahead of your current commitments and establish this 1 in 7 rhythm. Because of my travel, I can't do Sabbath the same day every week, but it's on my schedule, this 1 in 7 rhythm. And then call it Sabbath. Sabbath means something different than a day off. For most of us, our days off are just work of a different kind.
Yeah.
And then I would just go, if I could sit down with someone and have a cup of coffee about this, I go, hey, just give yourself some grace, start where you are, and grow into, over time, the practice of a full Sabbath and craft it in a way that fits your season of life. And I would tell you, it was really hard for me when I first started doing this. Honestly, I hated it because even if I was stopped on the outside, on the inside, my RPMs were redlining. It took a while to learn how to slow down my soul, but I will tell you, it is really worth fighting for. Yeah. And it is such a life-giving practice once you really begin to develop it.
Yeah. Would you be open to just sharing a little bit of your rhythm of what the Sabbath looked like for you?
Yeah. Most of the time we start in the morning, but sometimes we will start later in the day. But when I'm able to start Sabbath in the morning, I'm always the first one out of bed in my house. So it means getting coffee. It means just getting out a good book or, my Bible. And usually it's both. I take some extended time to read. I love to read and grow. But I'm looking for something that is life-giving to me, not something that's like preparing a talk or, planning a leadership lesson. It's like, what's enjoyable? So the last few years, I've got into reading historical fiction, and I've loved that. I usually spend some time doing that. Connie will usually then get up. We usually have coffee together, some more time. Sometimes we live in Colorado where the weather's great most of the year, so we sit out and just enjoy being together. I usually am like looking to do something fun and life-giving, like go to the gym. I'll maybe hit some golf balls, do a bike ride, some of that kind of thing. We usually try not to make a Sabbath a day where there's not a lot of like cooking and prep or house cleaning. Like we try to keep that stuff simple and light, and that's partially Sabbath oriented, and part of it's just getting older. We want to keep life simple. We try to do stuff that's more about relationships, so maybe we'll have dinner with a couple, or maybe Connie and I will just do a quiet dinner together. I usually involve some kind of a nap. I just enjoy a quiet day. But I think it's important to say to people, a Sabbath doesn't mean it's 24 hours sitting in your recliner. Like I'm an active person. Right. So piddling around in my yard or messing with the flowers or mowing my yard, that's not work to me. It's not what I do vocationally. And so it's life-giving. Now, I have to be careful because occasionally Connie will go to me, hey, your Sabbath doesn't seem like it's always very restful. Right. So I do have to be careful that even though it's life-giving to me, I want to make sure that I get to the end of my day and it feels like a day of rest, not a day of just endless activity.
Yeah, I think that's a great thing because like for me, Saturdays are Sabbath. And that's when I always go out and do my longest bike ride of the week. And I come home sweaty and exhausted and tired, but it's life-giving to me. There's a joy to it that I can't do that in my regular work week, but it is life-giving. I usually get a nap, which is part of it too, but a lot of those same rhythms of trying to put aside the typical task of the week and really enjoying just relationship, enjoying the being together and so forth. So you say sometimes in seasons, Sabbath changes. Anything that you would say to maybe a leader who's listening that to give them some license or some freedom to kind of go, it doesn't have to be static. You talked a little bit, sometimes you start in the evening, sometimes you start in the morning. Anything else you would add there that would just help a leader kind of go, man, how do I actually do this in the busyness? What are some first steps I can do to begin implementing this powerful tool?
And I would say, like, for some people, like, even if you started with a half a day, I think you also have to realize the season that you're in. Because if you got young kids, Sabbath is going to look different than it does for me as an empty nester, right? But I think this is where you have to go back and really study it for yourself, because I think unless you have a theological, like biblical conviction, like, hey, this is actually for my best, is something God commanded, and therefore I'm going to commit myself to it, even though it may be challenging to figure it out. I would say also pay attention to what is life-giving to you, and try to be intentional to craft or schedule a couple of things that are life-giving to you into that Sabbath, whether it's half a day, a full day, whether you start in the evening, however you do it. I think what's important is this rhythm of 1 in 7. And then here's another piece I would say, really get intentional about managing your technology on your Sabbath. Because I feel like we get sucked in this black hole of doom scrolling, or a lot of our work shows up on, email or texting or, those kinds of things. So I go, man, be really intentional. Get some really clear guidelines of what technology and how it's going to show up and how it impacts your Sabbath. So I would say that would be a really practical help as well.
That's good. That's so good. Okay, I want to turn to a corner to talking about leaders who maybe are listening and just feeling spent. They're feeling burnt out. They're feeling just tired. What would you be your first piece of advice or some wisdom you would give to help them turn towards a journey of health and healing if they're in that space?
Yeah. I think a lot of us, our natural default response in a moment like that is to look for an escape. Like, I got to get out of town. I got to get a few days of vacation. And that might be part of the answer. But I would say if you're really struggling with really feeling burned out, the vacation didn't do it for you, you're still in that place, I think you got to go inward. And you've got to begin to ask, what's at the deeper root of why I end up feeling burned out? Because you didn't get there overnight. And I always tell people the first step to burnout is you love what you do. Because when you love what you do, you give your all and you're all in. And in ministry, that's kind of baked in anyway, right? Because you're doing it for God and for Jesus. And so I think you got to go inward and explore your family of origin, do a genogram. And then what was really helpful for me, James, was begin to read books that are about the health of the soul and about how do you navigate your way out of a season of burnout? And I remember many years ago reading Wayne Cordero's book, Leading on Empty, as he went through his own experience of kind of hitting the wall. And, you might need to get with a therapist or a counselor or get some spiritual direction. And then I think you got to get so tenacious. I use this phrase a lot, and you've heard me use this, James. You got to grab your calendar by the throat. And because if you're going to get out of burnout, you got to establish some new rhythms. And my experience with high capacity driver type A leaders is you won't tweak your way there. You're going to have to make a radical recalibration of your world. And then I would also say, you got to start finding some things that give you life outside of your job or ministry.
Yeah.
So that you aren't tempted to just work all the time. When I was in my years at Saddleback and I get invited to go for a bike ride or go play around of golf or do a hike, I remember thinking to myself, are you kidding me? Do you know how much work I could get done in the 3 or 4 hours it would take to do that? And it didn't sound life-giving to me at all. But now that I have life-giving hobbies, those things no, I actually want to. And I find myself drawn and thinking about how can I get out on a bike or go hit some golf balls. And so I think those are a few things I would try to put on the radar of someone who is feeling like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like I've heard you talk many times about ambition, and so many leaders are so ambitious that it's hard to take yourself out of the center of everything and to actually feel like you can say no when, one of the things I always find is that some of the leaders at, top levels of leadership have the hardest time saying no to anything. And they're like, my calendar's so full. And I'm like, you are ridiculously in control of your life. You actually have more control than anybody else in the organization of your life. And I don't know if it's the ambition piece or just the weight of feeling like it's all on our shoulders that we have a hard time really getting a hold of our calendar and, radically changing the disciplines or the patterns of behavior that we have in our calendar, right?
Yeah, I think for many years, I can describe it now pretty clearly. I wouldn't have been able to always, but I had what I would call a faulty theology of availability. I thought if there was a need, because I was a leader in a ministry, like I had to always say yes, or if somebody asked me, I always had to say yes. And yet I challenge you, like, read the Gospels. That's not how Jesus lived his life. He said no. He embraced, human limits. He got away from the crowd. And so I remember, kind of always feeling like, well, I'll just find a way to squeeze it in. Well, that's a dumb way to live, So I think there's all these issues we're talking about. They run on two rails. There's the internal rail and the external. The internal is getting down to the deep why. What's driving me to that? What's behind all that? But then I have to manage it externally. And so, again, I love this verse in 1 Thessalonians where Paul says, make it your ambition. So there's that ambition word. Mm-hmm. But he surprises us with his next phrase when he says, make it your ambition to lead a quiet life.
Come on.
Like, I go, wow, what if I put my highest ambition and energy into just living a great Tuesday and making good decisions today and living by my priorities this Thursday? Like, what if I just focused on that and then was willing to say no to the things that are not my highest priorities and be okay with the fact some people might be disappointed in that?
Right. Yeah, that's so good.
So we could spend all day on this one. This one's
so
got a lot of layers to it.
And the reality is high capacity leaders, doesn't matter what field you're in, struggle with this because there is the demand of leadership that's real. Like people are counting on you. They're depending upon you for guidance, for leadership, for direction, for vision, for strategy. But you're also the only person as the leader of an organization, of a business, of a church that has complete control to kind of set the pace for yourself. And then I'd also say the pace you set for yourself is the pace that the rest of the organization is going to feel, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And I remember coming to a place in my life where I had to own, I was not the victim, I was the perpetrator. Mm-hmm. And that was a significant mind shift for me to go, hey, Lance, no one is holding a gun to your head. You have way more autonomy over your schedule and over your commitments than you're pretending that you do. Mm-hmm. And so, you've got to learn how to stop. And one of the biggest practical steps, James, that helped me is I tried to stop saying yes in the moment.
Yeah.
Like to put some space between someone's request of me and my commitment to do it. Because then I could really evaluate, is this line up with my priorities? Is this something that only I can do or should do? What are the implications of my yes to this? Often it's not as innocent as it feels in that moment. And putting space between the request and my commitment allows me to evaluate all that and make an informed response to that person.
Okay, I want to talk about the One Life process because what you created is such an incredible tool. Both my wife, Lisa, and I are certified in it. Lisa's actually been doing some life plans and One Life process plans. And talk to us about the One Life process, why it's powerful in helping leaders get clarity in their leadership and in their life and their purpose and their vision.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of basically a one-on-one process where you spend a couple of days and then there's some coaching sessions built into the process, the way we train people in it. And I've had people ask me, what makes this transformative? And it's not rocket science, but it's really a combination, I think, of two or three things that make it powerful. One is rarely in your life are you going to set aside 2 whole days to process sort of everything in your world. Mm-hmm. Where are you right now? What are your superpowers as far as your gifts and talents? what about your family of origin and, the stuff you picked up growing up and, and then talking about like, what is your true north? What's your life purpose? And what's your vision for your preferred future? And what is your life manifesto? It's a set of declarations about how you're going to live your life and what do you need in your life to stay replenished. And so we take a very holistic approach, looking at 8 different spheres of your life and come out on the other end with a bit of a game plan. And so I think some of it is like we actually set aside time to have unhurried conversation. And then we have a logic and a flow and a process with the power of the Holy Spirit that when we work the plan, we get to some really good clarity. And then hopefully you have a good facilitator who can ask you self-discovery questions that allow you to get to the clarity that you really long for on your life. And so to me, that's kind of, if I was going to say like what helps it really be that, it's really the combination of those things. But again, even in our life, are we really sitting down to go, am I living well the one and only life I'm ever going to have?
Yeah.
Like you get one shot at this. So it matters, and getting really clear around what is my true north and what is my preferred future and how do I want to invest in my family in this season? Like what matters to me? Like, so we do this one tool called My Deepest Desires, where we talk about like what matters most to you at the end of the day. Like what makes you come alive? What is fulfilling and brings you satisfaction? And what would you regret it if you never got around to it? And what do you want to be in your eulogy? And what must you do at the end of the day? Take away all the clutter. What must you do with your one and only life? So these are not light-hearted questions. There's some depth to this. And I love spending time helping people figure that stuff out.
Do you have a quick story of somebody that you've worked with that the One Life process was just talking about all the things we talked about, ambition, Sabbath, some of these burnout tools and so forth? Anybody that comes to mind that was just like this process was just radically transformational in their life?
Yeah. I mean, I've had the chance to do several lately. I think about a guy who was a worship leader in a really well-known church. And just as he had stepped away from that position, and he's been experimenting with several things, like in terms of what he does after, his full-time church staff role. And there's the financial implications, but there's also what is it that I'm made to do? And what makes me come alive? And part of the breakthrough for him, I think, was discovering out of his family of origin, what was the internal narrative that had been a limiting lid that was really based on a lie, and that he was believing. And I just remember the moment, and we talked around this for 30 minutes or so, and finally him just coming to the place where the lie that he was believing was, I'm not man enough. And then the breakthrough of that, what God has for him is that he would be a Gideon, that he would be a valiant warrior. And the breakthrough of that moment of just the power of that, like being able to name and begin to tame that lie. And then how can I now begin to walk out into God's truth? And then getting really clear around what he is made to do and how he can add value to people. Like just, I think, again, good guy, already, doing some good things, but it just brought focus for him to be able to really optimize his one and only life.
I love it. I love it. And I know you've worked with so many leaders and have brought so much resource and hope and strength to that have maybe found themselves kind of unrooted or unhealthy in seasons. And what you bring to the kingdom, what you bring to leaders is such a powerful thing. Okay. So a couple of things to kind of wrap up our conversation. So
Sure.
One of the things that people ought to know about you and I, Lance, is we both love to read. And typically we're texting one another maybe every 2 months, kind of going, what are you reading? So I haven't texted you lately. So I'm going to take the opportunity right now. What are you reading right now that I should read or other people should read?
Oh, wow. So I'm always reading on sort of the health of the soul and the health of life. So I've been reading a book called Sacred Rest that's been quite good by Sandra Dalton Smith. Really been enjoying that. Also read, not a Christian book, but the book Into Thin Air about the disastrous Mount Everest.
It's a great book.
I think in the late 90s, I believe is when it happened, but a fabulous, captivating read. I also read recently Beth Moore's autobiography called All My Knotted Up Life. It is fabulous and profound, and I think anybody in the world of church should read it. It's really good. And then I'll give you one more. I just started into John Ortberg's new book called Steps. It's basically a book about discipleship based on the 12 steps of recovery.
Okay.
And Ortberg's just a good writer. He always has great content. And so I've been reading that book recently.
You've been reading a lot of stuff lately. So I got one for you, since I'll give you something. Admiral William McRaven, you ever read his stuff? I think he wrote Leaders.
I know of him, yeah. I watched his commencement speech he did at the University of Texas.
Yeah, he's really great. I got into his stuff quite a bit, and his book, The Hero Code, is a quick read, but it's a good like daily kind of like each chapter has like one code, like on honesty or humor and stuff like that. It's been it's some really good stuff, and a lot of his stories from the military when he ran the special ops for the U.S. government. So pretty cool. So,
well, I know if you recommend it, I will like it. So anything you recommend, you've cost me hundreds of dollars, James.
Same here, man. We've spent a lot of each other's money on books. So.
Yes, exactly.
Well, Lance, man, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It's always like every time we have a conversation, every time you're on the podcast or I get the chance just to pick your brain, it's just a wealth of knowledge. And I'm going to put in the show notes all the places that people can connect with you, learn more about the One Life process. And you offer a certification opportunity for that as well for people who want to be a part of that, right? So I'll put that information in there as well so they can reach out to you. So, man, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate you. Love you, brother.
Well, love you too. And thank you for what you're doing. You are such a blessing to us personally, but to see how God is using you in the lives of other leaders and how you continue to grow and develop inspires me. And just you and Lisa are, for Connie and I, one of our favorite couples. So we love it when we get to hang out together.
I hope you were impacted by that conversation as much as I was. It's not every day you get to hear from someone who spent decades helping leaders pursue health beneath the surface. What stood out to me was the reminder that self-care isn't selfish. It's stewardship. Lance Witt's insights about grabbing your calendar by the throat is a timely challenge for anyone feeling stretched thin. And I want to encourage you to go back and review his framework for Sabbath. It's more than just rest, but restoration. It offers a powerful rhythm for sustainable, soul-rooted leadership. If you want to learn more about Lance's work or the One Life process, including how to go through it or become certified to lead others through it, check out the links in the show notes. And if you haven't already, I want to encourage you to start your leadership reset at liveleadlast.com/reset. It's a free 5-day journey to help you refocus your priorities and lead from a deeper place of clarity and purpose. If you're looking for weekly insights to stay grounded and growing, don't forget to subscribe to Rooted. It's my weekly leadership email. Just text GROW, GROW, to 66866 to sign up. And I'd love to stay connected. Find me on Instagram or LinkedIn. Just search The James Duvall. Finally, if this episode encouraged you, would you take a moment to rate, review, or share it with someone in your world? It helps more leaders discover conversations like this one and stay committed to living and leading well. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next week on the Live, Lead, Last podcast.